Chapter 64. An old acquaintance is recognized under melancholy circumstances, and Dothby's Hall breaks up forever. Nicholas is one of those whose joy is incomplete unless it is shared by the friends of adverse and less fortunate days. Surrounded by every fascination of love and hope, his warm heart yearned towards plain John Brodie. He remembered their first meeting with a smile, and their second with a tear, saw poor Smike once again with the bundle on his shoulder trudging patiently by his side, and heard the honest Yorkshireman's rough words of encouragement as he left them on their road to London. Madeline and he sat down very many times, jointly to produce a letter which should acquaint John at full length with his altered fortunes, and assure him of his friendship and gratitude. It so happened, however, that the letter could never be written. Although they applied themselves to it with the best intentions in the world, it chanced that they always fell to talking about something else, and when Nicholas tried it by himself, he found it impossible to write one half of what he wished to say, or to pen anything, indeed, which on re-perusal did not appear cold and unsatisfactory compared with what he had in his mind. At last, after going on thus from day to day, and reproaching himself more and more, he resolved, the more readily as Madeline strongly urged him, to make a hasty trip into Yorkshire, and present himself before Mr. and Mrs. Brodie without a word of notice. Thus it was that between 7 and 8 o'clock one evening, he and Kate found themselves in the Saracen's Head booking office, securing a place to Greta Bridge by the next morning's coach. They had to go westward to procure some little necessaries for his journey, and as it was a fine night, they agreed to walk there and ride home. The place they had just been in called up so many recollections, and Kate had so many anecdotes of Madeline, and Nicholas so many anecdotes of Frank, and each was so interested in what the other said, and both were so happy and confiding, and had so much to talk about, that it was not until they had plunged for a full half-hour into that labyrinth of streets which lies between Seven Dials and Soho, without emerging into any large thoroughfare, that Nicholas began to think it was just possible they might have lost their way. The possibility was soon converted into a certainty, for on looking about and walking first to one end of the street and then to the other, he could find no landmark he could recognize, and was fain to turn back again in quest of some place at which he could seek a direction. It was a by-street, and there was nobody about or in the few wretched shops they passed. Making towards a faint gleam of light which streamed across the pavement from a cellar, Nicholas was about to descend 2 or 3 steps so as to render himself visible to those below and make his inquiry, when he was arrested by a loud noise of scolding in a woman's voice. "Oh, come away," said Kate. "They are quarreling. You'll be hurt." "Wait one instant, Kate. Let us hear if there's anything the matter," returned her brother. "Hush." "You nasty, idle, vicious, good-for-nothing brute," cried the woman, stamping on the ground. "Why don't you turn the mangle?" "So I am, my life and soul," replied a man's voice. "I am always turning. I am perpetually turning, like a dang old horse in a dang old mill. My life is one dang horrid grind." "Then why don't you go enlist for a soldier?" retorted the woman. "You're welcome to." "For a soldier?" cried the man. "For a soldier? Would his joy and gladness see him in a coarse red coat with a little tail? Would she hear of his being slapped and beat by drummers damnably? Would she have him fire off real guns and have his hair cut and his whiskers shaved and his eyes turned right and left and his trousers pipe-clayed?" "Dear Nicholas," whispered Kate, "you don't know who that is. It's Mr. Mantalini, I am confident." "Do make sure. Peep at him while I ask the way," said Nicholas. "Come down a step or two, come." Drawing her after him, Nicholas crept down the steps and looked into a small boarded cellar. There, amidst clothes baskets and clothes, stripped to his shirt-sleeves, but wearing still an old patched pair of pantaloons of superlative make, a once brilliant waistcoat, and moustache and whiskers of yore, but lacking their lustrous dye, there endeavouring to mollify the wrath of a buxom female, not the lawful Madame Mantalini, but the proprietress of the concern, and grinding meanwhile as if for very life at the mangle, whose creaking noise mingled with her shrill tones appeared almost to deafen him, there was the graceful, elegant, fascinating, and once dashing Mantalini. "Oh, you false traitor!" cried the lady, threatening personal violence on Mr. Mantalini's face. "False? Oh, dang! Now, my soul, my gentle, captivating, bewitching, and most damnably enslaving chickabiddy, be calm," said Mr. Mantalini humbly. "I won't," screamed the woman. "I'll tear your eyes out." "Oh, what a ding savage lamb!" cried Mr. Mantalini. "You're never to be trusted," screamed the woman. "You were out all day yesterday and gallivanting somewhere, I know. You know you were. Isn't it enough that I paid £2.14 for you and took you out of prison and let you live here like a gentleman, but must you go on like this, breaking my heart besides?" I will never break its heart. I will be a good boy, and never do so any more. I will never be naughty again. I beg its little pardon," said Mr. Mantalini, dropping the handle of the mangle and folding his palms together. "It is all up with its handsome friend. He has gone to the dangnation bow-wows. It will have pity. It will not scratch and claw, but pet and comfort. Oh, dang it." Very little affected, to judge from her action, by this tender appeal, the lady was on the point of returning some angry reply when Nicholas, raising his voice, asked his way to Piccadilly. Mr. Mantalini turned round, caught sight of Kate, and, without another word, leapt at one bound into a bed which stood behind the door, and drew the counterpane over his face, kicking meanwhile convulsively. "Dang it," he cried in a suffocating voice, "it's little Nickleby. Shut the door, put out the candle, turn me up in the bedstead. Oh, dang, dang, dang." The woman looked first at Nicholas, and then at Mr. Mantalini, as if uncertain on whom to visit this extraordinary behavior. But Mr. Mantalini, happening by ill luck to thrust his nose from under the bedclothes in his anxiety to ascertain whether the visitors were gone, she suddenly, and with a dexterity which could only have been acquired by long practice, flung a pretty heavy clothes-basket at him, with so good an aim that he kicked more violently than before, though without venturing to make any effort to disengage his head, which was quite extinguished. Thinking this a favourable opportunity for departing before any of the torrent of her wrath had discharged itself upon him, Nicholas hurried Kate off, and left the unfortunate subject of this unexpected recognition to explain his conduct as best he could. The next morning he began his journey. It was now cold winter weather, forcibly recalling to his mind under what circumstances he had first travelled that road, and how many vicissitudes and changes he had since undergone. He was alone inside, the greater part of the way, and sometimes, when he had fallen into a doze, and rousing himself, looked out of the window, and recognized some place which he well remembered as having passed, either on his journey down, or in the long walk back with poor Smike, he could hardly believe but that all which had since happened had been a dream, and that they were still plodding wearily on towards London with the world before them. To render these recollections the more vivid, it came on to snow as night set in, and, passing through Stamford and Grantham, and by the little alehouse which he had heard the story of the bold Baron of Grogswig, everything looked as if he had seen it but yesterday, and not even a flake of the white crust on the roofs had melted away. Encouraging the train of ideas which flocked upon him, he could almost persuade himself that he sat again outside the coach, with Squeers and the boys, that he heard their voices in the air, that he felt again, but with a mingled sensation of pain and pleasure now, the old sinking of the heart, and longing after home. While he was yet yielding himself up to these fancies, he fell asleep, and, dreaming of Madeline, forgot them. He slept at the inn at Greta Bridge on the night of his arrival, and rising at a very early hour next morning, walked to the market town, and inquired for John Brodie's house. John lived in the outskirts, now he was a family man, and as everybody knew him, Nicholas had no difficulty in finding a boy who undertook to guide him to his residence. Dismissing his guide at the gate, and in his impatience not even stopping to admire the thriving look of cottage or garden either, Nicholas made his way to the kitchen door, and knocked lustily with a stick. "Hullo!" cried a voice inside. "What be the matter no? Be the tune afire? Ding, but thou makest noise enough." With these words, John Brodie opened the door himself, and opening his eyes too to their utmost width, cried as he clapped his hands together and burst into a hearty roar. "Ah, it be the godfather! It be the godfather! Tilly, here be Mr. Nickleby. Give us the hand, man. Come away. In within. Down beside the fire. Take a sup of that. Don't say a word thou shalt till thou'st drink it all. Up with it, man. Ding, but I'm right glad to see thee." Adapting his action to his text, John dragged Nicholas into the kitchen, forced him down upon a huge settle beside a blazing fire, poured out from an enormous bottle about 1/4 of a pint of spirits, thrust it into his hand, and opened his mouth and threw back his head, as a sign to him to drink it instantly, and stood with a broad grin of welcome overspreading his great red face like a jolly giant. "I might ha' knowed," said John, "that nobody but thou would ha' come without such a knock as yours. That was the way thou knockst at the schoolmaster's door, eh? But I say, what be this about, schoolmaster?" "You know it then?" says Nicholas. "They were talking about it downtown last night," replied John, "but none of them seemed quite to understand it like." After various shiftings and delays, said Nicholas, he has been sentenced to be transported for 7 years for being in the unlawful possession of a stolen will, and after that he has to suffer the consequence of a conspiracy. Ooh, cried John, a conspiracy? Somewhat in the Potter plot, what? Somewhat in the Guy Fawkes line? Oh, no, a conspiracy connected with his school. I'll explain it presently. That's right, said John. Explain it after breakfast, not now. For thou beest hungry, and so am I, and Tilly, she must be at the bottom of the explanations, for she says that's the mutual confidence. It's a room start, is that mutual confidence. The entrance of Mrs. Brodie, with a smart cap on and very many apologies for their having been detected in the act of breakfasting in the kitchen, stopped John in his discussion of this grave subject and hastened the breakfast, which being composed of vast mounds of toast, new-laid eggs, boiled ham, Yorkshire pie, and other cold substantials, of which heavy relays were constantly appearing from another kitchen under the direction of a very plump servant, was admirably adapted to the cold, bleak morning, and received the utmost justice from all parties. At last it came to a close, and the fire which had been lighted in the best parlour having by this time burnt up, they adjourned thither to hear what Nicholas had to tell. Nicholas told them all, and never was there a story which awakened so many emotions in the breasts of two eager listeners. At one time, honest John groaned in sympathy, and at another roared with joy. At one time he vowed to go up to London on purpose to get a sight of the brothers Cheeryble. At another swore that Tim Linkinwater should receive such a ham by coach and carriage free as mortal knife had never carved. When Nicholas began to describe Madeline, he sat with his mouth wide open, nudging Mrs. Brodie from time to time, and exclaiming under his breath that she must be rather a tidy sart. And when he heard at last that his young friend had come down purposely to communicate his good fortune and to convey to him all those assurances of friendship which he could not state with sufficient warmth in writing, that the only object of his journey was to share his happiness with them, and to tell them that when he was married they must come up to see him, and that Madeline insisted on it as well as he, John could hold out no longer, but after looking indignantly at his wife and demanding to know what she was whimpering for, drew his coat sleeve over his eyes and blubbered outright. "Tell 'ee what, though," said John seriously, when a great deal had been said on both sides, "to return to schoolmaster, if this news about one has reached school today, the old woman won't have a whole bone in her body, nor Fanny neither." "Oh, John," cried Mrs. Brodie. "Ah, and oh, John again," replied the Yorkshireman. "I didn't know what they louds mightn't do. When it first got about that the schoolmaster was in trouble, some fathers and mothers sent and took their young chaps away. If them as is left should know what's comin' to them, there'll be such a revolution and rebel, ding, but I think they'll ha' gone daft and spilled blood like water." In fact, John Brodie's apprehensions were so strong that he determined to ride over to the school without delay, and invited Nicholas to accompany him, which, however, he declined, pleading that his presence might perhaps aggravate the bitterness of their adversary, of their adversity. "Thus true," said John. "I should ne'er have thought about that." "I must return tomorrow," said Nicholas, "but I mean to dine with you today, and if Mrs. Brodie can give me a bed—" "Bed!" cried John. "I wish thou couldst sleep in 4 beds at once. Thou shouldst have 'em all. Bide till I come back. Only bide till I come back, and we'll make a day of it." Giving his wife a hearty kiss and Nicholas a no less hearty shake of the hand, John mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Mrs. Brodie to apply herself to hospitable preparations, and his young friend to stroll about the neighbourhood and revisit spots which were rendered familiar to him by many a miserable association. John cantered away, and arriving at Dothby's Hall, tied his horse to a gate and made his way to the schoolroom door, which he found locked on the inside. A tremendous noise and riot arose from within, and applying his eye to a convenient crevice in the wall, he did not remain long in ignorance of its meaning. The news of Mr. Squeers's downfall had reached Dothby's, that was quite clear. To all appearance it had very recently become known to the young gentleman, for rebellion had just broken out. It was one of the brimstone and treacle mornings, and Mrs. Squeers had entered school according to custom with the large bowl and spoon, followed by Miss Squeers and the amiable Wackford, who, during his father's absence, had taken upon himself such minor branches of the executive as kicking the pupils with his nailed boots, pulling the hair of some of the smaller boys, pinching the others in aggravating places, and rendering himself in various similar ways a great comfort and happiness to his mother. Their entrance, whether by premeditation or a simultaneous impulse, was the signal of revolt. While one detachment rushed to the door and locked it, and another mounted the desks and forms, The stoutest, and consequently the newest boy, seized the cane and, confronting Mrs. Squeers with a stern countenance, snatched off her cap and beaver bonnet, put it on his own head, armed himself with a wooden spoon, and bade her, on pain of death, go down upon her knees and take a dose directly. Before that estimable lady could recover herself or offer the slightest retaliation, she was forced into a kneeling posture by a crowd of shouting tormentors, and compelled to swallow a spoonful of the odious mixture, rendered more than usually savory by the immersion in the bowl of Mr. Wackford's head, whose ducking was entrusted to another rebel. The success of this first achievement prompted the malicious crowd, whose faces were clustered together in every variety of lank and half-starved ugliness, to further acts of outrage. The leader was insisting upon Mrs. Squeers repeating her dose, Master Squeers was undergoing another dip in the treacle, and a violent assault had been commenced on Miss Squeers, when John Brody, bursting upon the door with a vigorous kick, rushed to the rescue. The shouts, screams, groans, hoots, and clapping of hands suddenly ceased, and a dead silence ensued. "You've been nice chaps," said John, looking steadily round. "What's to do here, you young dogs?" "Squeers is in prison, and we're going to run away," cried a score of shrill voices. "We won't stop. We won't stop." "Well, then, don't stop," replied John. "Who wants thee to stop? Run away like men, but don't hurt the women. "Hurrah!" cried the shrill voices, more shrilly still. "Hurrah!" repeated John. "Well, hurrah like men, too. No, then, look out. Hip, 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 hurrah!" "Hurrah!" cried the voices. "Hurrah again," said John. "Louder still." The boys obeyed. "Another," said John. "Don't be afeard of it. Let's have a good un. Hurrah!" "No, then," said John. "Let's have yon more to end with, and then cut off as quick as you like. Take a good breath now. Squeers be in jail. The school's broken up. It's all over. Past and gone. Think of that, and let it be a hearty un. Hurrah!" Such a cheer arose as the walls of Duthby's Hall had never echoed before, and were destined never to respond to again. When the sound had died away and the school was empty, and of the busy, noisy crowd which had peopled it but 5 minutes before not one remained. "Very well, Mr. Brody," said Miss Squeers, hot and flushed from the recent encounter, but vixenish to the last. "You've been and excited our boys to run away. Now see if we don't pay you out for that, sir. If my pa is unfortunate and trod down by enemies, we're not going to be basely crowed and conquered over you by you and Tilda." "No," replied John bluntly, "thou bean't. Take thy oath of that. Think better of us, Fanny. I tell 'ee both that I'm glad the old man has been caught out at last. Dang glad. But you'll suffer enough without any crowing from me, and I be not the man to crow, nor be Tilly the last, so I tell 'ee flat. More than that, I tell 'ee no, that if thou needst friends to help thee away from this place, don't turn up thy nose, Fanny, thou mayest. Thou'lt find Tilly and I with a thout old times aboot us, ready to lend thee a hand. And when I say that, do not think I be ashamed of what I done, for I say again, hurrah, and dang the schoolmaster. There." His parting words concluded, John Brody strode heavily out, remounted his nag, put him once more into a smart canter, and carolling lustily forth some fragments of an old song to which the horse's hoofs rang a merry accompaniment, sped back to his pretty wife and to Nicholas. For some days afterwards the neighbouring country was overrun with boys, who, the report went, had been secretly furnished by Mr. and Mrs. Brody, not only with a hearty meal of bread and meat, but with sundry shillings and sixpences to help them on their way. To this rumour John always returned a stout denial, which he accompanied, however, with a lurking grin that rendered the suspicious doubtful, and fully confirmed all previous believers. There were a few timid young children who, miserable as they had been, and many as were the tears they had shed in the wretched school, still knew no other home, and had formed for it a sort of attachment which made them weep when the bolder spirits fled, and cling to it as a refuge. Of these, some were found crying under hedges and in such places, frightened by the solitude. One had a dead bird in a little cage. He had wandered nearly 20 miles, and when his poor favourite died, lost courage and lay down beside him. Another was discovered in a yard hard by the school, sleeping with a dog, who bit at those who came to remove him, and licked the sleeping child's pale face. They were taken back, and some other stragglers were recovered, but by degrees they were claimed or lost again, and in course of time Duthby's Hall and its last breaking up began to be forgotten by the neighbours, or to be only spoken of as among the things it had been.